He didn't expect to find anything alive in the wreckage, let alone two small alien cubs staring at him with glowing blue eyes. They were alone, they were scared, and something, or someone, was coming for them. Mila had no idea that his choice that night would change the future of two worlds, and all he had to do was walk away. But he didn't. The night sky had never been so loud. Ye was already up when the rumble started. It was a deep shaking sound that came from the horizon. Like the growl of some beast too large to be real, the air felt thicker, like something was pressing. Down on the world, he stepped outside his cabin and looked up. Something was falling from the sky, fast burning, spinning out of control. Fireball roared above the treetops and vanished beyond the ridge. Crash followed a second later. Louder than thunder, then silence. Seeley stood, frozen his breath, fogged in the cold air. He was a man who had seen strange things in his years on the outer colonies, but that was different. He turned back toward his cabin and grabbed his gear. Rifle, flashlight, breather mask, small medkit. He wasn't sure why he packed that last one. Maybe it was habit, maybe it was something else. He hiked through the thick trees for over an hour. Careful quiet, the forest was too quiet, no birds, no night. Sounds that meant something was very wrong when he reached the ridge. He saw the crater. The ship was half buried in the earth. Smoke hissed from torn metal. The hull was black and twisted. Symbols he didn't recognize were half melted along its side. Alieni kept low. He didn't know if anyone had survived, didn't know if they were friendly, didn't even know if they were people. He stepped closer. Boots crunching softly on scorched ground. A sound reached his ears, soft like a whimper, not machine noise, something alive. He raised his rifle, his breath quickened. Then he heard it again, a second voice, small, crying. His heart dropped. Not voices, children. He moved toward the sound and found the broken hatch inside the dark shell of the pod. Something shifted. He aimed his light inside. Two creatures looked back at him. They were small, furry, but not like animals. Their skin shimmered in the light. Their eyes were too large for their faces. One of them hissed weakly, the other curled into its sibling. They weren't human, but they were afraid. Lowered his rifle slowly. Took off his breather mask, showed them his face. He knelt at the edge of the hatch, didn't speak, just waited. After a long pause, one of them reached toward him. Tiny fingers touched his gloved hand. It didn't pull away. That's when he saw the blood. Not much out, but enough to know they were hurt. He reached into the hatch, lifted the smaller one first. It barely weighed anything. The other followed him on shaky legs. He didn't think, he just acted. Wrapped them in his old coat, cradled them against his chest and ran. He didn't look back at the crash site, didn't stop to mark the location, didn't wonder who else might have seen the fall. He knew was that they needed help now. When he reached the cabin, he locked the doors and covered the windows. His hands shook as he cleaned their wounds. Simple cuts. One had a bruised leg. The other was coughing. He gave them water, wrapped them in blankets. They didn't sleep that night, neither did he. They watched each other. Him from the chair near the stove, them from the nest of blankets he'd made on the floor by morning. They had names. He called the larger one Kiri, the smaller one Tharn. He didn't know what species they were, didn't care. They were alive, and they needed him. 3 days passed. The news reports didn't mention the crash. No satellite warnings, no colony alerts either. No one saw it, or someone was keeping it quiet. Chilly tried to act normal, went to the market once, bought extra food, said it was for storage. He kept the cubs hidden, taught them small words. They learned quickly. They were smart. Very smart. By the end of the week, Kiri could say his name. Tharn could open the cabin. Dorella set up cameras in the woods, motion sensors. Something inside him was starting to worry, not about the cubs, about who or what might come looking for them one night. As a storm rolled across the valley, Kiri curled up in Eli's chair and stared at the fireplace. Thurn sat on the floor beside him. Their fur had grown a little softer now. Cleneely sat nearby watching. Listening, Kiri pointed at the fire, then to his own chest, then to Eli's safe. The word was broken, but the meaning was clear. Eli felt something in his chest twist. He didn't answer, just nodded. They trusted him already, and he wasn't sure if that made him proud or afraid. He started building a hidden shelter behind the cabin. Nothing big, just enough room for two small bodies, just in case he trained them a little more, how to run, how to hide, how to stay quiet. He told himself it was for their safety. But deep down he knew something was coming. He could feel it. 2 months passed, then 3. The cubs grew. Fast, too fast for normal biology. Eli noticed it first when Kiri lifted a tree branch that weighed more than she should have been able to carry. Tharn once jumped to the cabin roof. In one leap, they were faster, stronger, sharper, but they never hurt. Him never showed fear, never acted wild. They were his ond. He was theirs. One morning, Eli checked the motion cams. One of them was offline. He went to check the wire and found it torn clean into not cut. Torn that same night, Tharn woke up screaming. Eli rushed to him. The little one shook in his arms, eyes wide, breathing fast. He kept repeating a word Eli didn't understand. Over and over, Kiri stood at the door listening. Silently asked what it meant, what Tharn was saying. Kiri looked up at him and whispered hunt. Later that week, Eli found a mark on the edge of the woods carved into the bark, deep, clean lines, alien symbols. He didn't know what it meant. But the cubs did. They avoided that tree for days. Something had been there. Something like them, but not like them. Eli sat by the fire one night, looking at the two of them sleeping side by side, peaceful, safe. He wondered how long that peace would last. He wondered what he would do when the ones who lost them came back, because he knew they would. He could feel it tanned when they did. He knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't let them take the cubs without a fight. The wind was cold in the morning, but Eli was already awake, chopping wood as he always did. Just before Thesson came up the valley around his cabin, it was quiet except for the soft rustling of leaves and the distant cry of some bird far off in the fun trees. But he wasn't listening to nature today, because from the corner of his eye, he could see 2 figures racing through the field behind the cabin, faster than anything human, faster than anything he had ever seen. Kiri and Tharn were already awake in training, as they did every morning now. They moved like lightning through the tall grass, leaping over rocks and logs. Like they weighed nothing, their limbs long and strong, their eyes sharp and full of life, but they were still young still. Learning in every move they made, every step they took. Eli watched and remembered every detail, because he wasn't just raising them anymore. He was teaching them, preparing them. It had been almost a full year since the crash, and not a single word had come from the sky. No ships, no patrols, no search teams, just silence. And that silence was loud, it was heavy, it pressed on. Eli, like a warning, he couldn't ignore. Something was wrong, something was waiting, and every day the feeling grew stronger. Deep in his gut, like a storm far off just below the horizon, he changed in that time more than he expected. The man, who once lived alone in a cabin to escape people, now spent his days caring for 2 alien children. He cooked for them, hunted for them, laughed with them, even cried with them sometimes when no one could see, and they had changed to not just in size but in spirit. When they first arrived, they barely made a sound, flinched at every loud noise, and curled up like animals in a trap. But now they stood tall, walked with pride, and spoke his name like it meant something more than just a sound. They called him Father now, and it made something warm and sharp twist in his chest every time. Eli didn't think of them as aliens anymore. He thought of them as his kids, not by blood but by bond. Stronger than anything he had ever known, they had learned to speak simple English now, not just words but whole sentences, though they often mixed in sounds from their own language, which was filled with clicks and deep tones he couldn't quite copy. One night, Tharn had asked him what the stars were. Eli had taken them to the roof of the cabin. He laid out old star maps and told stories from Earth and other colonies. Stories of humans reaching into the dark to find new homes and sometimes new enemies. Kiri had pointed to a cluster of stars far beyond the known space and said one word again and again. Homely didn't ask what had happened to their home. He didn't push. Because every time the word came up, Kiri's eyes went cold and Arn's shoulders trembled like they were remembering something they wished they could forget. So instead he gave them what he could. He gave them a home here with him. But the forest had stopped singing. The animals had moved deeper into the trees. Birds flew higher and faster. The motion sensors picked up odd shapes near the far edge of the valley. Not human, not familiar, just shadows that came and went like ghosts in the wind. Eli knew something was getting closer. He spent his nights reinforcing the cabin, adding extra metal plates to the walls. laying traps in the woods and wiring the shelter behind the house with its own power source and emergency food stores. He didn't sleep much anymore, but that was all right. He couldn't rest, knowing the cubs were in danger one afternoon while Eli was cleaning an old cum device. Tharn brought something to him in both hands carefully, as if it might break. It was a small round object covered in dirt and moss, but beneath the grime Eli could see it was metal, smooth and polished with faint etchings on the side. He took it from Tharn and cleaned it gently until the markings appeared clear and sharp, symbols he had never seen before, but similar to the ones on the crashed podgear. He stared at the object with wide eyes, then looked to Eli and said quietly, "Mother." Eli froze. The word hit harder than he expected. He didn't know if it meant their mother was still alive, or if it was just a memory or something else, but either way it meant one thing. Someone else had been here. Someone had dropped that object. And if it wasn't the cubs, then it meant the past was getting closer. The cum device buzzed later that night. Short bursts of static, then silence, then again another burst, and then a pattern. It wasn't human code. Eli had seen enough military signals to know that, but it was organized, repeating and getting stronger, like it was searching for something. He didn't tell the cubs. Instead, he began teaching them more serious lessons. Not just how to hunt or hide, but how to survive, how to fight, how to know when to run and when to stand your ground. He showed them old military drills, simple tactics. How to listen with more than ears, how to move without being seen, how to read tracks in the dirt, and how to use their speed without wasting strength. Kiri picked up everything fast, almost too fast. Her mind worked like a machine. Her eyes missed nothing. She had the instincts of a Tharn, was different, slower, more careful, but strong in ways Eli couldn't explain. He had a sense for danger, like he could feel it before it happened. More than once he pulled Eli out of a situation just seconds before something went wrong. They were more than just kids. They were becoming something more, something dangerous. But Eli didn't fear them. He feared what might come for them. The next sign came in the form of a burn mark near the northern trees. Not from fire, but from something else. A ring scorched into the ground, perfect in shape to perfect, no fallen branches, no signs of flame. Just a circle of dead earth and a strange hum in the air that made his teeth ache. He didn't let the cubs near it. He marked the area on his map and doubled the traps. He began to wonder what kind of people were hunting for children and why they hadn't come sooner. Each night, the cum device grew louder, clearer, and though the words were still alien, Eli began to hear a rhythm and name. Kiri. He asked her what it meant, but she only shook her head and looked away. Tharn said one word in reply. Lost. Eli knew then that their time was running short. He sat by the fire that night, staring into the flames, while the cubs slept beside him, and thought about all the things he had lost in his life and how strange it was that these two alien children had become the only thing he truly cared about. He wondered if their real mother was still alive, and if she would come to take them away. And if she did, what would he do? Would he fight her? Would he run? Or would he let them go? He didn't know, but one thing was clear. He would protect them until his last breath, even if it meant standing against something far beyond anything he had ever faced, because they were his now, and nothing in the stars would change that. In the deep silence of space, far beyond the colonies, a ship drifted through the dark, its hull black as shadow, its engines silent, its form long and sharp like a blade waiting to strike. It had no beacon, no signal, no name, only a purpose, and inside the ship stood a warrior, carved from war and fire, her armor scarred by battles, her eyes sharp with pain and fury and loss. She had been searching for a long time, longer than most humans lived. And she had never stopped, not for rest, not for food, not for hope, because hope had burned away long ago. Her name was Commander Varela, and she was one of the last of her kind, not in blood, but in belief. Her people, once proud and ruthless warriors, now scattered across the galaxy, broken by their own civil war, betrayed from within, and weakened by years of losing battles. But none of that mattered to her, because she only wanted one thing, her cubs. She had sent them away during the fall of her city in a stolen escape pod, hoping to keep them safe from the flames that consumed their world. She had trusted them to the stars, believing she would find them again, and she had followed every signal, every whisper, every false lead, through dead systems and enemy space, through traps and lies and broken promises, and now at last she had found something real. The signal came from a planet on the edge of human space, a quiet place. Not important, not rich, not defended, just a backwater colony of farmers and miners and settlers, and one signal not human. Faint and old, but alive and repeating a word only she would recognize the name of her. Daughter Kiri, her hands tightened into fists, her claws pressing into her palms. Her breath slow and deep. She had played the image in her head 1,000 times. What she would say, what she would do, but every time it ended the same, with fire and fury and tears, because if the humans had taken her cubs, if they had hurt them, then no wall, no weapon, no army would stop her from burning that world to ashi. Reached the orbit of the planet within hours, her ship cloaked from scanners her systems. Silent and still, she watched from above, studying the surface, scanning every structure. Every heat source, every unnatural movement. She saw towns small and spread. Apart, she saw factories, mines, transports, fields, but nothing that stood out until she saw Ida. Cabin alone on the edge of a valley with motion sensors and defenses. Too advanced for the local tech, with a power source that did not match the rest of the area, and with 2 heat signatures smaller than adult humans, and one larger, stronger, older male. And when she enhanced the images, she froze there. They were her cubs standing outside in the grass, sparring with wooden staffs, moving like warriors. Moving like her breath caught in her throat, her heart ached. Her claws scraped against the metal floor of her ship, and for the first time in many cycles, her anger cracked, not with weakness, but with something worse, confusion. Why were they there? Why? Were they laughing? Why did they look at the human like he was family? She slammed her fist into the console, the image glitching for a second, then returning clear again, showing her cubs smiling, showing the human calling to them, handing them water. Placing a hand on their heads like they were his own, as she could not accept that not yet she had to see for herself. She had to confront the human he. Felt the change in the air before he heard the sound. It was subtle, at first a chill that did not belong. A silence too deep, the forest holding its breath. Then the birds scattered in all directions, and the trees bent as something passed overhead, invisible but fast and heavy. He grabbed his rifle and ran outside, calling for Kiri and Tharn, already moving to the shelter path before they answered. But they were not afraid. They were looking up, and Tharn whispered one word, "Mother." Yuli turned toward the sound and saw nothing but sky. Then the wind shifted, and a shape appeared above the trees. A ship, darkened, sleek, shimmering into view as it slowed its descent, silent as death and terrifying in its design. It hovered for a moment, then landed near the ridge without a sound. No flames, a blast. Just stillness. He raised his rifle as Kiri and Tharn stepped closer to him, not behind him, but beside him. Watching with wide, unblinking eyes, the ramp opened, and she stepped out tall and armored, her face hidden by a helm of black and silver, her presence like a storm made of flesh. She did not speak, she only looked at them, all 3 of them. Then she took a step forward, and the earth seemed to flinch beneath her. Kiri moved without thinking, placing herself between Eli and the warrior. Tharn did the same, and Eli could feel his chest tighten, not from fear, but from something deeper, something older, a feeling he could not name. The warrior stopped 10 feet away. She removed her helmet slowly and let it fall to the ground, revealing a face marked by time and grief and fire. Her eyes locked on Kiri and Tharn, then flicked to Eli. Cold, sharp, measuring, she spoke in a voice like broken stone. Who raised the melee? Didn't answer at first, too many thoughts flooding his mind, too many instincts screaming at him to run or shoot or speak, but all he did was lower the rifle just a little and say quietly, "I did." The warrior looked at the cubs again, and they stepped closer to her, their bodies tense, their eyes full of confusion and pain and something else, something like hope. She knelt slow, her body shaking, her armor creaking as she went down on one knee before them, her head bowed, and for a moment everything was still. Then she looked up at them and said, "I'm your mother." Kiri did not move. Thorn's lips trembled. Delay said nothing. The warrior stood again and took off one of her gauntlets. She reached out her hand to Kiri, palm up, claws open, not to grab, but to offer. Kiri stared at the hand, then looked at Eli Shea. Didn't speak, but her eyes asked a question. One he had no answer for, so he nodded, not permission, not command, just understanding. Kiri stepped forward and placed her hand on the warriors, and Tharn followed a second later, both of them standing between the two worlds. They came from the one they had lost and the one they had found, the warrior. Whispered their names, then looked at Ilayu, kept them alive. Isu taught them strength. Isu gave them a name, they gave me one too. She said nothing more than. She turned back toward her ship and walked up the ramp without a word, without a sound, leaving the cubs standing in the grass and Eli staring at the place where fire had not come. But he knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning, because now the past had found the man it would not leave quietly. The sun had not yet risen, and the world was still dark, but Ilay was already awake, standing at the edge of his porch, holding his rifle steady and silent. His eyes locked on the tree line where something moved just beyond the shadows. He had not slept. Since the alien ship landed, he had not heard the engines, or seen the lights since that first moment, when she appeared and vanished again, but he could feel it. The weight in the air, the way the birds stayed quiet, the way the cubs barely spoke at all since then. He could feel something watching. Kiri and Thon were inside, sitting on the floor near the fire. They had not trained today. They had not asked for stories or hunted rabbits like they used to. They had only sat in silence there, eyes on the door, their bodies tense, as if waiting for a sound only they could. He really scanned the woods one more time, then slowly stepped back into the cabin, locking the door behind him and checking the perimeter on the screen his cameras showed. Nothing but static. One by one, they had gone dark. He tried fixing the signal, but it was not interference. It was being jammed, and that meant only one thing. The warrior had not left. She was still here. He sat near the fire and cleaned the rifle with slow, careful hands. He did not speak. The cubs did not speak, but he could feel their questions pressing into the silence like thunder before a storm. They wanted to know what he would do, what she would do, what would happen if she came back. He had no answers. Later that day, he went out to set new traps. He moved quietly through the trees, marking new paths and scanning for signs of motion. He saw nothing until he reached the ridge near the crash site, where the grass had grown tall again, and the soil had hardened, but something was wrong. The scent in the air was different, old and sharp, like burned metal and smoke, and under that, another smell, one he had only smelled once before. Warrior was nearby. He moved slowly around the trees and saw footprints, large and deep, not human, not animal, the shape of armor pressing into the dirt with precision and purpose. She had been here recently, and she had not tried to hide it. Teal. I followed the trail as far as he dared, but found no camp, no fire, no supplies, only silence. And that same scent in the wind. He returned home and told the cubs nothing, though he knew. They already knew. They could feel her just like he could, maybe even more that night as the stars came out and the cold wind whispered through the cracks in the cabin. Eli sat near the door, rifle across his lap, his hand on the trigger, listening and waiting and wondering if he would survive the night. The sound came just past midnight, a soft, mechanical hum, low and steady, moving through the trees, not loud, not sharp, but enough to wake every instinct in Eli's body. He stood quickly in motion for the cubs to go to the back room. They obeyed without a word, slipping into the hidden shelter and sealing the hatch behind them, just as they had practiced. Then he stepped outside. The sky above him was clear, but the air buzzed with energy. The wind didn't move, the trees didn't sway, and the birds didn't sing. It was as if the world had paused to watch. He walked forward slowly, rifle raised, eyes scanning every shadow, every branch, every movement, and then he saw her. She stood at the edge of the trees just beyond the last beam of light from the cabin. Her armor darker than the night, her face hidden again behind the helm, her hands at her sides, claws unclenched but ready, her posture still, an unreadable lie. Didn't speak, neither did she. The Nay stared at each other across the distance, across the silence, across the weight of everything unspoken. Then she stepped forward. Lie raised the rifle. Shay stopped. He didn't lower the weapon. The wind shifted again, and her voice came through, clear, strong, and cold. Not angry, not afraid, just firm. You trained them well. Lie said nothing. She took another step. He held his aim Steady, they are strong, they are fast, they survive. That is good. Still he did not speak. She looked toward the cabin and tilted her head, slightly as if listening to something far away, then turned back to him. But they are not yours, Ellie. Felt his grip tighten. They called me father. The words came out low and steady, not loud, not harsh, just true. She paused for a long time, then nodded. Once they remember me. I know they do, but they do not run to me. They do not cry for me. They do not bow. Her voice cracked just a little. Eli lowered the rifle just slightly. Maybe they remember more than you think. Another pause, then she removed her helmet and let it fall again to the dirt, just like before. Her face pale and hard, and tired eyes burning, not with rage but with something deeper, something older, something broken. I lost everything to keep them alive. I gave up my home, my command, my name, and now I find them here calling a stranger. Father Eli stepped forward now, just once, not to threaten, not to challenge, just to speak. I didn't take them. I found them. I saved them. She looked at him long and hard. Would you die for them? He nodded. Would you kill for them? He did not answer. Would you give them back? He said. No. A word fell between them like a rock into water, heavy and final. Then she did something unexpected. She sat not on her knees, not in surrender, cross-legged in the dirt, like a warrior resting between battles, like someone trying to understand a world that no longer made sense. She looked up at the stars and said nothing. For a long time Eli stayed where he was, rifle at his side, but no longer aimed at her, his heart still racing, but his voice calmed. Need time? She nodded slowly. Time is what I no longer have. And then from the shadows another sound came, not from the woods, from the sky. Both heads turned. A second ship descending fast, not cloaked, not quiet, roaring like thunder, cutting the clouds with fire and wind and speed. It was not hers, it was not human, and it was not friendly. Eli turned to run back to the cabin, but the warrior was already moving her claws, drawing weapons from her belt, her voice a shout that echoed through the trees. Hide the meal. Threw open the door and rushed to the shelter hatch, pulling it open to reveal the cubs, wide-eyed and alert. Get down, he said. They obeyed. He closed the hatch and turned to face the storm, though. Ship landed hard, smashing through trees and crushing rocks, sending dust and wind in every direction, and when it opened, the figures that stepped out were not like her. They were armored and armed, but without honor, without care, brutal and loud and fast-moving, with purpose toward the cabin. The warrior met them head. And Eli watched as she moved like fire, her blades cutting through air and armor, her roars shaking the ground. The invaders falling one by one, but still they came more and more, until even she was forced back, blood on her armor, her breath ragged, her strength fading. Eli raised his rifle and joined her, shot after shot, each one finding its mark, each one buying them seconds, but it was not enough. There were too many, and too fast, and too cruel. Then a sound came from the shelter, a scream sharp and high and full of fury. The cubs had come out. Kiri leaped first, striking with speed and grace. Tharn followed, his fists heavy, his movements clean. The invaders turned to face them, but they were too late. Together, the four of them pushed the enemy back, step by step, breath by breath, blade by blade, until the last one fell, and silence returned. Smoke filled the air. Blood stained to the dirt. The warrior dropped to one knee, clutching her side. Lee stood over her, panting, bleeding, watching the cubs rush to her side, helping her up, holding her steady. She looked at him, eyes wide. You fought beside me, so did you? She looked down at Kiri and Tharn, then back at Eli. They have two bloods. Now he nodded on to Holmes. She said nothing, but she did not argue, not this time. The air was thick with the smell of fire and blood, the smoke from the crashed enemy ships still curled through the trees like fingers reaching for something that had already slipped away. Eli stood in the center of the ruined clearing, rifle lowered, hand shaking, body covered in dust and small cuts, his mind trying to catch up with everything that had just happened. The warrior lay on her back. Not far away, her armor cracked her side, bleeding, her breath slow and heavy. The cubs were by her side, Kiri pressing cloth to the wound, Thon watching the sky, as if expecting another ship to drop from the clouds. No one spoke for a long time. Mealy finally moved toward them, stepping over broken metal and scorched grass, until he stood beside the warrior. Her eyes opened and locked on his. There was no anger there, only something strange, something deeper, like respect or confusion or both. Could have Rooney shook his head, so could Yushi tried to sit up and grunted in pain. Kiri helped her while Tharn wrapped her arm with one of Eli's torn shirts. They worked together like they had always done it, like family. Eli crouched beside them and checked her pulse. Her skin was hotter than it should be. Her blood was darker than he expected, but her heart was strong. You need rest, no? Time he looked around, but there were no more enemies, no more sounds, no more ships. They were gone. For now you have time, she didn't argue. She leaned back against the tree and closed her eyes for just a moment, and when she opened them again, she looked not at Eli, but at the cubs, her voice soft for the first time. Do you remember? Mikiri nodded slowly, her eyes uncertain pieces. Small light smells cold metal, fire Tharn at a day. Scream a room, a shaking sky. She looked at Eli. Were taken from me during the fall of our world. I hid them in the escape pod and told it to flee. I was supposed to follow, but I was captured. I escaped months later, but by then they were already gone. No trace, no signal, no records. I spent years chasing rumors you found us, Tharn said quietly. Yes, but I was too late. She looked down at her hands covered in dirt and old scars. They are not what I left behind. They are something else now. Something you. Medeli didn't answer. He just watched the cubs as they sat close to her, as they listened, as they didn't move. Awakeri touched her arm gently. You are still Mother Tharn. Nodded, but so is he, Father Thorn. Warrior closed her eyes again, this time not from pain but from something else, and when she opened them again, there was no anger, no challenge. A truth they are both. She looked at Eli. Do not know what to do now, Eli. Yes. Sat down, fully crossing his arms over his knees and staring at the ground. Yea, not mine by blood, but they chose me. And I chose them. I never expected it. But it happened, and I won't let anyone take them, not even you. Not unless they want to, Guy. Do not want to take them. I want to know them again. I want to learn what they have become. Then stay Stather. Word hung in the air like something heavy and strange and impossible. She blinked on this planet, in this place, with humans with them. She looked at the cabin, the trees, the smoke in the sky. Do not belong here, they do. Then I will try for them. That was the moment. The wall broke between them, not with words or promises, but with shared pain and a quiet agreement that both had done everything they could, and both had nearly lost everything, and now there was something worth keeping. The next days passed slowly. The warrior moved with pain but did not complain. She helped fix the cabin where it had burned, helped bury invaders far from the valley. She cleaned her weapons and trained the cubs in their old ways, and watched as they mixed those lessons with Eli's quiet strength and simple teachings. They hunted as a family, cooked meals over fire, told stories under the stars, and Eli listened to her speak in her language, and he heard the words of a past too heavy to carry alone. She learned how to chop wood, how to boil coffee, how to sit in silence and listen to wind, how to mend a broken coat with human thread in her fingers, not made for soft things. He learned how her people honor their dead, how they name their children not at birth, but at their first act of courage, how they sing to the stars before battle, how they do not kneel except before the worthy and. Then one night as they sat by the fire and the cubs slept between them, she said quietly, they were not meant to survive. Not in war, not in space, not on a human world, but they did because of you, and now they are more than I ever imagined. Lai didn't speak for a long time, then he said, you taught them how to fight, I taught them how to live, both mattered. She nodded. Both mattered, but something still lingered in the air. A question that had no easy answer, a shadow that would not leave. What happens when your people come looking? They won't. They'll do, you know, because I told them not to. What did you tell them? That the cubs were dead? Eli's head turned sharply. Why be? Because they would not understand what they had become. They would want to take them, break them, shape them into tools for war again. I could not let that happen. I would rather be exiled than watched Adel. Looked at her for a long time, then nodded once. You did the right thing. She looked down at the fire, or I hope so. The cubs stirred in their sleep. Kyrie's hand reaching for Tharn's, Tharn curling closer to her, their breathing slow and soft. They are safe. Here she whispered, yes, they are home. The sun rose slowly through the trees, its light painting gold across the leaves and branches and warming the quiet. Valley birds called out to each other, squirrels leapt through the trees, and wind moved gently through the grass, but the warrior did not move. She was already awake, sitting cross-legged in the clearing, watching the cabin, watching the woods, watching the sky. She had not slept much since the fight, since the enemy came and left, not because of fear, but because her mind was never quiet. Not anymore, not since she found the cubs and saw what they had become. Milai stepped out of the cabin with 2 cups of bitter black coffee. He handed her one. She took it with a nod and sipped without a word. They sat in silence while the forest came alive around them. "I never thought I would be here again like this," she said. Finally, Lee didn't look at her. "You mean not fighting?" She shook her head slowly, not hoping, though. Cubs came out soon after, stretching and yawning. Tharn carried a bow and Kiri had a pouch of berries they had picked at first light, both of them moving with grace and quiet skill, both of them watching the trees. Just like she taught, but laughing just like Eli taught. She smiled just a little. "They will be stronger than both." Avusili nodded. "That's the idea." Later, they trained in the field near the broken tree, the one struck by lightning years ago and never fully recovered. Tharn practiced close combat with his hands and feet, while Kiri focused on speed and dodging. The warrior watched them both, correcting form, adjusting balance, speaking in her sharp tongue that echoed like stone. Eli stood nearby with his rifle across his back, offering advice when needed, never interrupting her teaching, but never letting it become too hard either. The cubs listened to both, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. When the training ended and the sun was high, they all sat under the tree, eating from wooden bowls filled with stew Eli made from dried meat and wild roots. The warrior tasted it slowly and nodded. "Better than military rations." I grinned. "Thanks, I learned from burning 10 pots first." The cubs laughed. Later that day, Eli took them hunting. They moved through the woods together, slow and silent. Kiri spotting tracks, Tharn setting traps, Eli teaching them how to read wind and shadow. The warrior followed but did not speak. She watched and listened and learned what kind of father Eli had become, what kind of children the cubs were now. She saw how they cared for each other, how they shared food, how they helped the smallest animals escape the traps if they were too young to eat, how they whispered stories under their breath as they walked. They are not soldiers, she thought. They are something new. That night after dinner, Eli fixed one of the solar panels while the warrior sat beside the fire, sharpening her blades, and the cubs cleaned their weapons and checked their gear without being told. A sound broke the calm. It was not loud, but it was clear and strange, a soft beeping from inside the wreckage of the enemy ship. Eli ran to it first. Rifle ready, the warrior followed, her blades drawn, but what they found inside was not a threat. It was a signal repeating over and over in a soft, glowing pulse message. The warrior stepped closer and placed her hand on the control panel. The light changed. It recognized her and began to play a recording of voice in her language. Deep and official and cold. "You are marked as rogue. Your ship was found. Your failure noted. Return with the children, or be hunted. We are coming." The signal ended. She stood there unmoving for a long time. Eli looked at her, waiting for a word, but she said nothing. He followed her outside into the clearing where the cubs waited, their eyes full of questions. "They know you are alive," he said. "They know the cubs live as well. They come." "Yes, how many?" "Too many." Ellie stared at the sky. "We need to leave." The warrior shook her head. "No, we stand here, we fight. They will destroy this place, then we make it strong." The cubs looked at her, then at Eli, then back again. "We." Stakiri said, "This is home." Tharn said. The warrior looked at them, both her face unreadable, then nodded. "Then we fight as one." From the moment everything changed. The days became drills. The nights became plans. The forest became a fortress. They built traps in the trees, reinforced the cabin, dug escape tunnels, and rigged signals through the valley. The cubs trained harder than ever. Eli taught them to shoot with precision and speed. The warrior taught them to move without sound, to strike without warning, to think like prey and hunt like predators. Each night they met by the fire and shared what they had built, what they had learned, what they feared, and what they would protect. Above all else, family. In the 7th day, the first sign came. A shimmer in the air above the hills where the clouds moved wrong, where the birds Avoided the sky. The warrior saw it first and raised the alarm. Eli checked the scanners and confirmed. It cloaked ships entering orbit. Not one, not two, but three. Maybe more. It begins. She said they will not talk first. No. They will not wait. No way. No did. Then we won't either. They armed themselves with everything they had. The warrior put on her armor for the first time since she landed, her blades on her back, her claws, sharpened her helm in her hands. Eli checked his rifle, counted every round placed. Extra batteries in his vest and strapped knives to his boots. The cubs carried their packs there. Weapons, their courage. As the sky darkened and the stars appeared, the ships descended slowly. No sound, no fire, just shadow and hunger. They came for the cubs, but the cubs were ready. They hit the ground fast, spreading out like wolves through the trees. But the traps were waiting. Nets snapped, spikes rose, alarms screamed, and lights blinded. The first wave fell into chaos and confusion, and then Eli fired the first shot, clean and sharp. The warrior followed, a blur of movement, her blade singing her voice rising in a battle cry that shook the trees. Kiri ran through the shadows, striking and vanishing, her daggers flashing. Tharn smashed through lines with his fists, knocking armored enemies into trees. They moved like fire, like wind, like fury. Trained by blood and raised by love, the fight raged for hours. The forest burned in places, the cabin cracked but did not fall. They pushed the invaders back, step by step, body by body, breath by breath. And when the last one fell, the silence returned. Not broken, not heavy, just calm. They stood in the smoke, surrounded by fallen enemies, the warrior breathing hard. Eli reloading his rifle, the cubs holding each other alive, strong, unbroken. We are. Delilah asked Noth. The warrior said not. Yet she stepped into the open clearing and looked up at the sky. No, you watch, I know you listen. I am not coming back, and they are not yours. They are free now, and I will kill anyone who tries to change that. There was no answer, but the sky stayed quiet, and after a long moment the clouds parted, and the stars returned. The threat was over for now. Later, as the sun rose and light spilled over the valley, Eli sat on the porch watching the cubs sleep in the grass. The warrior stood beside him, arms crossed, eyes sharp. You protected them, you raised them, they are both of you. She nodded slowly. Then, we are both needed always. They said nothing more. There was nothing more to say, only to live. Rain had come in the night, soft and steady, washing the blood from the leaves and the ash, from the sky, soaking the earth and cooling the fire-scarred trees. The smoke was gone now, the stars hidden behind clouds, the world quiet again, as if holding its breath, as if listening to the silence after the storm. The cabin stood tall, though some walls were scorched and some beams. It cracked, its windows dark, its door wide open, letting in the wind and the scent of wet soil and wood smoke inside. The warrior sat on the floor, sharpening a blade with slow, precise strokes. Her armor leaned against the wall, her claws laid beside her as if resting, her eyes half closed but not asleep, never truly asleep, not anymore. Lai stood near the fire, wrapping Kiri's arm in clean cloth, her cut not deep but still red, still raw. She watched him without flinching, her jaw set, her eyes tired but calm. Tharn sat by the door, carving a piece of wood into the shape of a beast he had seen once in a dream, or maybe a memory. Eli didn't ask because he already knew. Sometimes silence said more than stories. Sometimes the things they made with their hands were louder than words outside. The storm passed, slow and cold, dripping from leaves, sliding down bark, falling into the river with a rhythm like a heart. The warrior looked up, her voice low, her tone unreadable. They will come again, maybe not this season, maybe not this year, but they will come because they always come, and they always want Morel. I nodded. Once in check, the rifle leaning against the wall, the barrel cleaned, the battery replaced, ready for the next time, for the next shadow, the next storm wall. Be ready against it. Looked at him, then at the cubs, her gaze softer than before, but still sharp like the edge of her blade. You could leave, take them somewhere safer, somewhere far from here. Kiri looked up, her voice quiet but sure. This is home. Thorn nodded, once carving without stopping. Why, already chose. Eli smiled just a little, not because he was happy, but because they were strong, stronger than he had ever been, stronger than most grown soldiers he had known. They built something here, something Rie family. Warrior stood and walked outside, her bare feet sinking into the soft mud, Her eyes scanning the trees, the mountains, the river that curved like a scar through the valley. She breathed deep, and for the first time in years. It felt clean. She did not belong here. Not truly. Not in the way Eli did. Not in the way the cubs had. Grown into it, but she had a place now. A role not written in orders, not carved in duty, but formed in the fire of what they had survived together. The cubs came out one by one, standing beside her, not behind her, not in front, but beside all of them. Facing the same wind, the same trees, the same uncertain future, the stars were still hidden, but she looked up. Anyway, speaking not to them, but to the sky, as if someone out there might still be listening. They live because of him. They live because he gave them something I never could. He gave them love without asking for anything. He gave them patience without limits. He gave them a world without fear, and they made it their own, and I will protect that now, not because I have to, but because I choose to. Eli heard her words, though they were not meant for him, and he did not speak. He just stood at the door, watching the way. The cubs looked at her the way she looked at them, the way the world around them had changed, and yet stayed the same. Night they cooked a meal together, a real one, not rations, not field stew, but a feast of roots and fish and roasted fruit. Kiri added herbs she found near the stream, tharn ground spice into powder, using a stone bowl passed down through Eli's family. Eli laughed for the first time in days when the flames flared too high and burned his hand a little, and the warrior showed him how to cool it with a leaf from her world, a strange silver plant that hummed when touched. They sat around the fire and told stories, not of war, not of pain, but of dreams. Kiri spoke of the stars and the ships she would one day fly. Tharn spoke of building something high and strong, maybe a watchtower, maybe a bridge, maybe a home with walls that could never burn. Eli spoke of his parents long gone, of how they would have loved to see this, to see what he had become, to see who he had become, and the warrior listened to it all, her eyes reflecting the fire, her voice quiet when she finally spoke. Kai once believed strength meant silence, meant killing, meant standing alone, but I was wrong. Strength is this. Strength is choosing each other again and again. Even when it hurts, even when it's hard, even when the sky falls and the ground breaks and the world burns, they said. Nothing to that, because nothing more needed to be said later when the cubs had fallen asleep, curled up in blankets near the fire, and the moon peeked through the clouds. Eli and the warrior stood at the edge of the clearing, looking at the stars that had finally returned. He asked her what her real name was, and she told him not the name the army gave her, not the code she used in battle, but her true name, the one her mother whispered once before the world ended. He said it back slowly, careful, not to break it, and she smiled, not fully, but enough that it mattered. She asked him what he feared most, and he said, losing them, losing the cubs, losing her, losing this. He had nothing before them, and he could not bear to have nothing again, and she understood, because she had once had everything and lost it all in a blink. They stood there until the cold came again, and the fire burned low, and the stars blinked like eyes watching over them. They were not perfect, not healed, not whole, but they were something better, something stronger, not because of blood or duty, but because they chose each other when no one else woulda. Human, a warrior to alien cubs in a valley that remembered everything that was what made a family. The morning came soft and bright, as if the sky itself wanted to forget the war, as if the earth wanted to breathe again. The sun rose over the valley, spilling gold across the trees and warming the cabin roof and the wet stones by the river. The cubs were the first to wake, their laughter returning like birdsong, echoing through the trees, light and free and full of something that could only be called hope. Eli stood on the porch holding a steaming cup of bark tea, his eyes tired but peaceful, watching them chase each other across the grass with wooden practice swords. The wind moved through the leaves, carrying the smell of pine and new life, and the warrior stood at the edge of the clearing, her blade strapped to her back, but her hands relaxed, her shoulders no longer tight, her eyes watching every step, every breath of the cubs, not because she expected danger, but because she simply wanted to see them alive. A signal blinked softly on the edge of the wrecked enemy ship, broken wires flickering like a heartbeat, one final message, one last transmission. The warrior stepped inside and touched the panel, her voice low and calm, this time not angry, not cold, just sure. They are no longer yours, they never were, and they never will be. Again, the signal died and did not return. She stepped back out into the light and looked at Eli. He raised an eyebrow as if to ask if it was over, and she nodded slowly, not because the world was safe, not because they were free from all danger, but because they had chosen this place, and that choice gave them power no enemy could take. Later that afternoon, the cubs brought her something wrapped in cloth, something they had worked on together for many days. When the warrior opened it, she froze. Not because it was a weapon, not because it was a tool of war, but because it was a carved wooden figure of her kneeling with her head bowed, and the cubs standing before her, not as soldiers, not as warriors, but as children, and the figure of Eli stood behind them all, holding nothing but open arms. "We made it," Kiri said, her voice trembling. "Because we wanted you to know," Thorn added, "that we are proud to be yours." The warrior held the carving in her hands, her breath slow, her heart full, her armor heavy on her back, but her soul lighter than it had ever been, and without a word she knelt right there in front of them, not out of defeat, not out of duty, but out of something older and stronger than both respect. Eli stepped forward unsure, his hand twitching as if ready to stop her, but she looked up and said only one thing. "You raised them, you made them who they are. This is my bow, not of surrender, not of shame, but of truth." He didn't speak, just stood there, eyes wide, heart thudding. Too fast, and the cubs looked between them all at once, understanding something that needed no words. Later that night, when the stars returned and the valley glowed under their quiet light, they all sat together by the fire. No drills, no weapons, no plans, just warmth and quiet, and the sound of Kiri humming something her mother once sang, and the sound of Tharn carving a new figure, one of a home that could not be broken. And the warrior leaned against a stone with her eyes half closed, and Eli leaned beside her, and the cubs curled up beside them both. No one spoke of tomorrow, because today was enough. The sky stretched wide above them, endless and open and silent, and they all looked up and knew something without needing to say it. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Whatever tried to take them apart would find nothing but fire and steel and love standing in its way. Because this was not a story of war, not anymore. This was the story of a warrior who found her cubs again, and the human who made her kneel not with power but with kindness, and the two children who became more than soldiers. They became a family. The end.